And there's no way she would have made it in. And what sort of evolved over the next 10 years was what I call the makings of the homeless talent competition. And the way that you would get in to our buildings was if you had demonstrated that you were 6 months sober and that you had insight into your mental illness and that you had a rent payment history, which is absurd if you're homeless, right? That's the whole point. And Sarah Rayburn was not getting into the Times Square anytime soon. And my boss would walk past the same people on the streets, I think, and long for the days when you could say, just screw it. So here's the situation. Well, wait, I don't want to give away the surprise. So Roseanne started doing some research, and she found out that there were 30 organizations in the Times Square neighborhood whose job it was to help the homeless in some way or another. And she went over to England, and they had the Rough Sleepers Initiative, which had reduced street homelessness by 75%. And she said, hey, let's do that in Times Square, right? Times Square is the hardest part of the hard problem. It's as bad as it gets. And there's already these 30 organizations doing something. So really, all we need to do, and this was like the first hypothesis, is just kind of change the way these organizations work together, and it'll result in housing, you know? And that'll be great, and that'll be awesome, it'll be fun, and this will be a really good thing. So the idea of Street to Home was born, and Common Ground put in a grant to SAMHSA to replicate what had been successful in England. They put in a grant for, I think it was $450,000 a year, just this amount of money from SAMHSA. And at about this time was when I got introduced to Common Ground, and I was looking for a job that I really believed in and really cared about. I had just gotten out of the military, and Roseanne told me, well, I have this new project. I want to reduce street homelessness by 2/3 in Times Square. We think we're going to get this SAMHSA grant. You seem like you'd be a good fit. If we get the grant, I'll give you a call. And I was like, okay, awesome, right? So I got a call. I was really excited by this. And I got a call about a month later, and it was Roseanne. And she said, hey, I still want you to come reduce street homelessness by 2/3 in Times Square. And I was like, awesome, you know, like I really wanted to do this. And she said, but we didn't get the SAMHSA grant. We got $75,000 from JP Morgan Chase. And I was like, okay, all right. And I didn't know any difference. So, so we got $75,000, and you know, I can't even begin to quantify the outcomes of that $75,000 investment. I'll tell you some stories as we go. But if we had waited to get the SAMHSA grant, none of this would have happened. And I just want to encourage you to think, as we talk about this stuff, was there an idea that you heard about this week that you'd really like to pursue that's really off the beaten path that SAMHSA ain't going to pay for, you know? And just to encourage you to think about what can you do to really solve problems that the government's probably not going to pay for, and I would encourage you to do it. So we had these brutal facts, right? We looked at the reality. Sarah Rayburn wasn't getting in the Times Square anymore. Becky Kanis really wanted a job she cared about, and the government wasn't going to pay for it. And there's these 30 organizations, you know, helping the homeless in various ways, but nobody was getting housed. So this is a ground truth slide. We went out onto Times Square, and we do counts in the middle of the night. That's part of our industry. You go out in the middle of the night. Some of you might have even volunteered for these things once a year, and you count. And there were 55 people sleeping in Times Square in the dead of winter. Probably every block there was at least 2 or 3 people sleeping outside. And so the first thing I did was I went out with there were 13 organizations who had government money, and what the government paid them to do was to contact a homeless person. So, you know, I'm brand new, I'm from the military, I don't really know what's going on, so I'm like, I'm just gonna learn from these really smart people how you end homelessness. And I would go out on outreach, and what I would see was they had a little pad of paper, and they would say, hi, do you want a sandwich? Do you wanna go to shelter? And the homeless person would tell them to take a hike, and then they would scribble it down, because they had done what they were supposed to do. And then the thing that really just, you know, got my goat, well, now it does. I didn't know any better at the time. But there were some people who were just like really homeless, you know, like you can picture in your mind that guy that's always been on that street corner who's just a mess and smells like urine, and you're like, what the hell's going on in our society? They would walk right past that person every time, and I would say, hey, what about, who's that guy? You know, like I was kind of curious about that, and they like every time would say, he doesn't want housing, or he doesn't want shelter. We've already talked to him. He's service resistant, you know? And I was like, oh, what's that? That must be really bad, you know? And so And if he wanted housing, he would go to shelter. He would take my program because I offer, a detox program. And if they really wanted housing, they would come to my program. I'm with a mental health program. If they wanted housing, they would come to my program. So we went out on the streets and asked them what they wanted, which is where the deep listening comes in, the ground truth. Actually, we hired some summer interns to go find out what they wanted, and they took a bunch of cigarettes out and sat down and talked to people, and what they wanted was housing. So that was kind of easy. So we found out they wanted housing, and we tried to pull together then these 13 other organizations to have meetings about how are we going to knit together this thing to house people, which was the theory of change that was operative at the time that I was hired to do, to just knit together this collaboration of service providers who have good intentions and want to do these things. And so this is where we learned about the diffusion of innovations. So they would come to the meetings because I have a laggards go to meetings. Thank you. That's my thing. They would come to the meetings, and we would say, hey, why don't we try to work together so that it can result in housing? And the types of things that would come up in these meetings that were some of the most painful meetings I've ever been in my life was, well, even if we could work together, like I couldn't really tell you what I'm doing because of HIPAA. And I was like, HIPAA, what the hell are you talking about, And I have a secret for everyone in this room that I think is really important for you to understand and know is no one has ever gone to HIPAA jail. There is no such thing as HIPAA jail, and I personally violate HIPAA every day. There is no such thing as HIPAA jail. But that derailed entire meetings. And just make a form and have them sign it, okay? It's not that hard. But those laggards, they derailed the meeting. So I was really frustrated by this. I was talking to my boss. We were on a train platform, I remember, in New Jersey somewhere, and I was like, you said that, I just had to knit together these service providers, and all they want to do is talk about what they can't do, And I was like, this is just getting ridiculous. And Roseanne had just talked to Paul Farmer with Partners in Health, and he had just told her this quote that has become a rallying cry at Common Ground, which is ignore the laggards. And she sketched out on a napkin for me this diffusion of innovations curve, and she said, ignore the laggards. And she explained to me, which I'm assuming you guys all know this, but a really small percentage of the people are innovators. I personally don't put myself in that category. But then early adopters recognize a good idea when they hear it, and they're willing to try at least. And then the early majority, once they see it works, they'll try it, and the late majority will do it when the government pays for it, and the laggards are never going to do it ever. And so this new rallying cry, ignore the laggards, so I was like, all right, awesome. And so we stopped inviting the laggards to the meetings. And laggards go to meetings, so they were like, hey, how come I wasn't invited? And we were like, oh, we forgot. We totally lied. And we started getting some things done. And so we had a group of about three organizations out of those 30 were willing to work with us. And what they could agree to was what I call the ding dong and ditch. So we would work on the housing applications, and they would go out and find who was homeless and bring them to our door and drop us off because they did outreach. And they knew how to do outreach. And they didn't want us encroaching on their outreach turf. So we're like, all right, you do outreach, and you bring us people that have been in this neighborhood at least a year, and we'll house them. Although we didn't know how we were going to do that either. We had to figure that out. They agreed to do that. So they started bringing people to our office. And they had been homeless. The people they brought to our office, in all honesty, had been homeless an average of 10 years each. And I had it by this point that I've since completely recovered from, a disdain for social workers based on my first impressions. So it was just a bunch of wide-eyed, AmeriCorps Vista volunteers that make $10,000 a year. $75,000 can make you be creative. As a quick aside, we once were searching on the internet that a monkey is only $6,000 and an AmeriCorps intern is $12,000, and we were like, you or two monkeys, But